This is my latest project with my CNC router, but it'll be easy to do it with a scroll saw also. And all it is just a little ceiling hanger that kind of looks like a compass on a weather vane. I had a couple of old hooks in my ceiling that were used to hang a swag light years ago before I bought my house, and I just tried to figure out a way to make them look a little bit better. I started by using my router to make all the north, east, south, and west letters using some cherry blanks that I had laying around. The easiest way that I found to make something like that and hold it firmly to keep it from moving around while you're routing it is to use a blank that's about a 1/16 of an inch thicker. And then what I do when everything's all done, I just go back and I take about a 1/16 off on my joiner, and the letters fall right out. With the letters all cut out, the next thing that I had to do was I had to drill some mounting holes to mount each of the letters on the brass rods that I was going to use. I had a old piece of 1/4 inch diameter brass rods laying around that was quite tarnished and whatnot, so first thing I did is I cut that into a couple of lengths that I needed, and then I took it to my buffer, and I used that to polish it up again. And the next thing that I did was I glued up a blank of Bubinga that I had laying around, and I turned that to make the central ball that everything would pivot on and mount to. I started by turning it between the centers on my lathe to get the first couple of cuts made. And then once everything was all roughed out, I went back and I mounted it in my 3-jaw chuck to allow me to do the final operations and to finish sanding it up a little bit. Then to get all my holes that I drilled in it nice and square and parallel, what I did is I pulled the chuck right off the lathe and I mounted that on my drill press to allow me to position the holes accurately. I drilled the first set of holes through, then I took the whole chuck and I just rotated that exactly 90 degrees to allow me to position the second set of holes accurately. With all the holes drilled, the next thing I did was just test fit everything together just to make sure it was going to line up properly. Next, I took a chunk of cherry and I turned a piece of trim to go on the bottom of the mounting plate. And finally, everything got 3 coats of the Danish oil that I like to use with some sanding in between each coat. And then after the oil was done, I let that dry, and then I added a coat of the Johnson paste wax in the end to finish it off. The base for it was an old piece of trim that I had made years ago that I had laying around, so I decided to use that. And I started by screwing the new trim piece I made onto the base. I used some of those Craig screws because I like to use them because you really don't need a pilot hole. They drill pretty good and they never split the wood. With those two parts screwed together, then I took and I inserted the center shaft, which is actually just a hanger from an old ceiling fan, and I pushed that up through the hole. It's a pretty firm fit, but I wanted to make it so that I could adjust the pointing the way the arrows point on it, and I just put a pin in there, and then I pull it back down so it locks in place, and it still allows me to adjust the arrows so they're pointing in the proper direction. I did drill the hole in the mounting ball a little bit oversized, so I wound up wrapping a couple of wraps of electrical tape around it to make it fit tight. Then the next thing I did is I took my brass rods, which were a pretty snug fit, and I pushed them in place to the dimensions where they're supposed to be. And then I used a little bit of super glue to lock everything in the final position. I roughed up all the areas on the brass where the super glue was going just to kind of hopefully give it a little bit of a grab on the brass rods that were polished. With the main shaft installed, the next thing I did was install the 2 stub shafts that butted up against it. Then I started by gluing on the the letters, and then an arrow that goes on the north side to tell which direction you're pointing it. And as I put the parts together with the super glue, I tried to get them pretty square, because you really don't have too long of a time before that stuff sets up and grabs and you can no longer adjust them. And with everything all glued together, the next thing to do was just to take it upstairs and mount it to the ceiling. As I told you before, there were a couple of old hooks in the ceiling that I was planning on trying to reuse to mount this, so I just drilled a couple holes and I screwed the threaded shaft out a little bit further and then put the hooks right back in place to mount it. And you can see it actually looks pretty good sitting up there, and no one will ever have to wonder what direction that they're looking at when they come to my house anymore. So this is just another quick, simple project idea that I thought that I would share with everyone, just in case anybody would like to, make something like it. But anyway, thanks for watching, and please subscribe.